Today, we begin with the signature. Not just ink on paper, a signature that made the world stop and listen. It happened in a quiet room. One man from the Sahel, one from South Asia, Ibrahim Traoré, interim president of Burkina Faso, Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India. They sat across from each other, surrounded by cameras, translators, and nervous aides. But for Traoré, it wasn't politics. It was something deeper. He called it the sound of chains breaking. $15 billion. That's the number the headlines carried. But listen closer. This wasn't charity. This wasn't another foreign loan dressed as aid. This was something rare. A deal built not on dependency, but on dignity. Oil for technology, sovereignty for respect, two nations exchanging strength. And for a continent long treated as a pawn, it felt like a declaration. For decades, Africa news meant crisis, collapse, or conflict. But this time, the story began with confidence, with choice. Traoré stood as the voice of a generation. The children who studied by candlelight, the farmers who bled into dry soil, the miners who worked under foreign flags. He didn't speak for himself. He spoke for them. And when the cameras flashed, when the ink dried, something shifted, not just in Burkina Faso, but across Africa. Because the world suddenly saw what many had refused to believe, that a small, landlocked country had chosen its own path, and it did so without permission. Today, we ask, what does this $15 billion pact really mean? Could it light homes, train engineers, create jobs, defend borders? Or will it vanish like so many promises before? If you've ever watched a community choose between survival and dignity, hit subscribe. This story matters, and we want you here as it unfolds. The deal signed between Burkina Faso and India is not a gift. It is not aid. It is not a rescue mission. It is a strategy. And every line of it is written in the language of production. $4 billion will go toward oil extraction and refining. No more sending raw crude abroad and buying it back at double the cost. No more waiting for Western refineries to determine value. This time, the oil stays home. This time, Burkina Faso will refine, store, and use its own energy. $5 billion will build the foundation for the country's energy future. Petrochemical plants, pipelines, power grids. These are not favors. These are factories, on Burkinabe soil, using Burkinabe labor. Another $3 billion will fund steel and manufacturing plants, machines, tools, vehicles, construction equipment, all built in country for the first time. It means jobs that last. It means skills that spread. It means factories that don't just produce goods, but confidence. $2 billion more is pledged to defense, not weapons delivered in cargo planes, not promises buried in paperwork, but real production, rifles, armor, communication systems, made in Burkina Faso, designed by Burkinabe engineers, operated by Burkinabe hands, and $1 billion will support agriculture, telecommunications, and technical training. Because the backbone of any nation is its farmers, its coders, its teachers, its workers. This is the real infrastructure of independence. What makes this different from the past? Two things. First, these are not loans. They are foreign direct investments. India is not sending money with strings. It is planting capital, expecting growth. And second, Burkina Faso is not silent. It is not begging. It is not passive. It is negotiating, asserting, demanding. That is what frightened the West. Not the money, but the message. That a small African nation could sit at the table and not ask for permission. Of course, not everything about this deal is perfect. Investment is not friendship. Capital flows both ways. India expects returns. It expects influence. It expects access. The risk is real. If managed poorly, the profits could disappear. The control could slip. The benefits could be delayed or denied. But the potential is clear. If done right, Burkina Faso doesn't just export oil. It exports engineers. It builds ships, not just wells. It generates energy and dignity side by side. In markets across Ouagadougou, the news spreads fast. Taxi drivers tune in on crackling radios. Mothers in Kaya discuss it at the water pump. Students in Bobo-Dioulasso debate it in classrooms. And the same question returns again and again. Will this deal reach us? Will the lights come on in my village? Will my son get a factory job? Will my daughter learn to code? That's the true battlefield. Not in press releases, not in summit halls, but in the lives of ordinary people. That is where this pact will rise, or fall. And that's why Traoré called the deal a gamble. Not because the terms are unclear, but because the stakes are enormous. Because the whole world is watching, waiting, measuring. And if it works, it will not just lift Burkina Faso. It could lift the whole region. It could teach Africa something the world has long tried to silence. That we are not what they say we are. We are not poor. We are underbuilt. We are not voiceless. We are unheard. We are not broken. We are unrecognized. If you've ever prayed for a moment when a nation might rise without begging, write down what part of this story gives you hope. We read every word. The reaction came fast, not just from the streets of Burkina Faso, but from the corridors of global power. In Washington, analysts met behind closed doors. In Paris, advisors whispered about lost influence. And in Brussels, policymakers stared at the headline, Burkina Faso signs $15 billion deal with India. But the loudest response didn't come from official podiums. It came from silence. That deep, uneasy kind of silence that follows when the expected script is torn apart. For decades, the West told Africa what was possible, what was reasonable, what was allowed. And suddenly, here was Ibrahim Traoré breaking those rules, calmly, on camera. In the halls of oil companies and international banks, the deal wasn't just a surprise, it was a threat. Not because of its scale, but because of its meaning. Because if Burkina Faso can do this, who's next? From Mali to Chad, from Niger to Guinea, leaders are watching. Young officers, reformers, rural mayors, they're not asking how much money was signed. They're asking how much power was reclaimed. Western media has taken its position. Quiet skepticism, carefully chosen phrases, questions about governance, stability, transparency. They don't condemn the deal, but they don't celebrate it either. And that's how you know it hit a nerve. Meanwhile, India has remained steady. Prime Minister Modi praised the agreement as a historic step in South-South cooperation. Indian media highlighted job creation, energy security, and strategic influence in the Sahel. Behind the scenes, it's a diplomatic earthquake. Because this isn't aid. This isn't loans through the IMF. This is India stepping into a space once dominated by France and the United States. But perhaps the most careful observers are in Moscow and Beijing. Russia has applauded the deal. Kremlin-linked news outlets call Traoré the face of a post-colonial generation. They see in him a leader willing to challenge the West without asking for permission. China, however, is cautious. For years, Beijing has invested heavily across Africa. Infrastructure, mining, energy, but usually on China's terms. And now, a new model is emerging, one where African nations draft the contract. Both Moscow and Beijing understand. If this works, the old playbook may not. Inside Burkina Faso, emotions are mixed. Some call it a miracle. Others call it dangerous, but nearly everyone calls it different. Different from past deals, where the benefits vanished. Different from past speeches, where promises faded. Traoré knows the stakes. In a recent address, he said plainly, "This is not a victory. It is a test." Because every great gamble carries two futures, one bright, one dark. Best case? Jobs flood in, electricity flows, students are trained, factories rise. Burkina Faso becomes a hub, not a hinterland. Worst case? Corruption creeps in, contracts are mishandled, profits vanish overseas, and the people, once again, are left in the shadows of their own wealth. The line between these futures is not drawn in ink. It's drawn in discipline, in transparency, in leadership, and above all, in the eyes of ordinary people. The mother selling onions in Kudugu, the father driving a taxi in Ouagadougou, the young woman learning to weld in a dusty workshop. They will decide if this pact lives or dies. This isn't just politics, it's personal. It's power, either returned to the people or lost once again. If you've ever seen someone risk everything for the chance to build something better, share that memory in the comments. Someone needs to hear it. Walk through any market in Burkina Faso, and you'll hear it. Not in slogans, not in speeches, but in simple, everyday questions. Will my son find a job? Will my daughter learn a trade? Will the lights stay on this time? Because in the end, this deal isn't about GDP. It's about life. And life in Burkina Faso has never been simple. For years, families have endured rotating blackouts, broken wells, empty clinics, schools without chalk, hospitals without light, roads that wash away in the rain. And now, $15 billion. That's not just a number. That's a promise, or a warning. Because if this money brings nothing to the people, it becomes another betrayal. Another line in the long book of broken hope. But if it works, if those factories rise, if power reaches villages that have waited for decades, then this moment, this pact, could mark the beginning of a new identity. That's why the stakes are so high. Ibrahim Traoré knows this. He spoke directly to it. "Don't judge this deal by what I say," he told the nation. "Judge it by what you see in your homes." He didn't promise miracles. He promised transparency. That's rare. And it's risky. Because the people will remember. Burkina Faso has a long memory. People still speak of Sankara, the revolutionary who walked instead of drove, who planted trees with schoolchildren, who built clinics in dust. Traoré invokes that legacy carefully. He knows comparisons can be dangerous, but he also knows the people are watching for signs. Not words. Signs. And the signs will show up in small places, in the extension cord running through a grandmother's kitchen, in the first paycheck of a young steelworker, in the silence of a generator that finally goes quiet. Because the power is on. The civil impact is not abstract. It's specific. Imagine a rural school where students once studied under flashlights. Now the lights stay on. A new science lab opens. The teacher doesn't leave for the city. She stays, because now there's reason to stay. Imagine a farming cooperative in Kaya. They get access to better irrigation, thanks to new tech. Yields double. Children stay fed. Boys don't have to migrate. Girls go back to school. That's what this deal means, if it works. But if it doesn't? If the wires are laid and never powered, if the factories are built and never staffed, if the money is spent but never seen, then the anger will be sharp, the disillusionment deeper than before. Because this time, the people dared to hope. There are whispers already, caution, doubt. Some say this is just another foreign flag, painted in new colors. Some say it's already too late to change things. But others, especially the young, are pushing back. They're showing up to vocational centers. They're enrolling in engineering programs. They're volunteering to guard infrastructure. Because belief, once planted, grows roots fast. And that's the true power of this moment. It isn't just about energy or investment. It's about will. For the first time in years, some Burkinabe believe they might stay, not because they must, but because they choose to. If you've ever watched a younger generation pick up where the older one left off, share that moment. A memory, a name, a reason to keep building. From the outside, this pact might seem local, regional, one country, one signature. But step back, and the picture grows wider. Because the world is watching. And not just quietly. In Washington, officials are concerned, not because they oppose Burkina Faso's progress, but because the model is changing. For years, U.S. strategy in Africa centered on counterterrorism, aid programs, and diplomatic pressure. Now, a small Sahel nation has shifted the narrative, with India, not America. The U.S. has not issued formal objections. But behind closed doors, analysts warn of a new challenge, a future where African nations choose partners based on respect, not alignment. And that raises tough questions for Western influence in the region. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the mood is different. Russia has welcomed the deal. Kremlin-linked media call it a sign of multipolar awakening. Traore is described as bold, independent, untied to former colonial rulers. Russian military advisors, already present in neighboring states, may see this as momentum. But the sharpest response may be from Beijing. China has spent years investing in Africa, railways, ports, energy grids, but always with Chinese firms in control. The Burkina Faso-India model is new. It's bilateral, transparent, locally anchored. For Beijing, this isn't a crisis, but it is a warning. If African nations begin demanding more equitable terms, the old system, where China builds, owns, and extracts, might not last. So now, three global powers are watching. One cautious, one supportive, one recalculating. India, by contrast, remains quiet and focused. No military bases, no political conditions, just capital, technology, and access. For them, this is energy security. For Burkina Faso, it is sovereignty. And that's what makes this pact so powerful. It redefines what Africa News can be. Not a cry for help, but a call to negotiate. Not a request for rescue, but a claim to agency. This is not just about what Burkina Faso gains. It's about what Africa chooses, and what the world must now accept. If you've ever seen a country assert itself with quiet dignity, share the moment that made you believe in its right to do so. Your memory might just inspire someone else. When Ibrahim Traoré signed his name beside Narendra Modi's, it was not just a contract. It was a gamble, a statement, a challenge to history itself. $15 billion, not just for oil, but for factories, jobs, power plants, training programs, defense workshops, for a future that dares to look different. Some see a miracle, some see danger, but everyone sees motion, movement, the start of something that may not stop. And now the question is simple. What happens next? 5 years from now, the world will look back. And what will they see? A nation glowing with lights? Or a dream lost in paperwork and corruption? Will Burkina Faso become a hub, where engineers rise, youth return home, and families thrive? Or will it remain trapped between promises made and promises kept? The truth is, no one knows, not even Traore. What he offers is not certainty, it's commitment, and that commitment now belongs to the people. Because this pact, this project, this moment, will be won or lost not in summits, but in schools. Not in headlines, but in homes. History is watching. And history does not forgive wasted chances. If the factories rise and stay open, if the workers are trained and paid fairly, if electricity flows to the forgotten, then this pact will not be a footnote. It will be a fire. One that lights the continent. One that forces the world to see Africa as a partner, not a pawn. But if the wealth is stolen, if the promises stall, if hope dies, then this will not just be a failure. It will be a weapon, a warning. Another reason for skeptics to say, "See, they tried, and they failed." That is why this story is not just about Burkina Faso. It is about what is possible, what is worth fighting for, what is sacred. If you've ever lit a candle for someone you believed in, someone who dared to lead with courage, light one more. And if this story stirred something in you, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, let your voice be part of what comes next, because the next chapter will be written by those who choose to care.